that. And I realized that I stopped sharing my screen, so sorry about that. All right, so moving on, just a quick OLC overview. We are the OLC. For folks who don't know us, we are committed to improving reading and writing for children in Oakland by working with schools, community organizations, and community members, really working together so that every Oakland child learns and loves to read. Just some housekeeping. Also, we will be emailing out materials, the slides and the recording for this presentation. We will be having a moment for Q&As. You can also directly message me the questions. I'm going to be fielding them and then towards the end, giving them to Judith so she can answer them. If there are deeper, meatier questions, she is also open to answering them over email, and we'll facilitate that as well. We ask that you stay muted throughout the presentation. We have a handful of things to get through this evening. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our presenter today. Oops, sorry. So we are currently, our featured speaker is Dr. Judith Fontana. She is a professor from Emerita from George Mason University, recently retired from Virginia Department of Education's Training and Technical Assistance Center, lots of acronyms here, at Mason, where she provided an array of services related to literacy to teachers, administrators, and school divisions. Judith has been an adjunct for both the special education and literacy programs at Mason, where she and colleagues developed a dyslexia certificate program. She is currently working as an NCIL consultant for the National Center on Improving Literacy and as an adjunct for Marymount University. Dr. Fontana is a professional developer for the strategic instruction model and has been a letters facilitator. She continues to work with and advocate for students with learning disabilities. Professional affiliations include the Reading League, International Dyslexia Association, Council for Learning Disabilities, and Learning Disabilities Association of America. Academic interests include instructional assessment and SDI. So today we will hear Dr. Judith speak. We'll have some interactions as well through the chats, and she's going to take it from here. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Judith, you can go ahead and start.
Well, thank you very much for that eloquent introduction. I sound really boring. So I want to call your attention to probably either along the very bottom of your screen or up at the top. There's a little bar, and one of the icons in there says responses. I'm going to ask you to be using that in a little bit. Also, later on, I'm going to ask you to unmute because I need somebody to respond to my questions when I'm playing the teacher here. I'm going to try to make this interactive. So welcome, and thank you so much for spending your afternoon with me. We entitled this program, Implementing Reading Instruction Aligned to the Science of Reading. Our topic is timely, and several states have mandated, including Virginia, have mandated instruction that adheres to what is referred to as the science of reading. So I am here for you today, and come on, wait a minute. It's going to give me a hard time here. Doesn't want to move. There we go. I need to back up one more. I apologize for that. I did practice today. So before I start, I want to tell you a little bit about the National Center. The National Center on Improving Literacy, or NCIL, is federally funded national comprehensive center established by the Every Student Succeeds Act in 2016. It's jointly administered by the Office of Special Education Programs, the Office of Elementary and Secondary Education at the U.S. Department of Education. We are a partnership among literacy experts, university researchers, and technical assistance providers from places like the University of Florida, Center for Research at Florida State, Center on Teaching and Learning at University of Ohio, RMC Research Corporation, and we are under the direction of Boston University's Wheelock College of Education and Human Development. So our mission is to increase access to and the use of evidence-based approaches to screen, identify, and teach pre-K to grade 12 students with dyslexia and other literacy-related disabilities. So today, our learning outcome for this session is to improve your ability to translate your knowledge of research grounded in the science of reading into evidence-based instructional practices in your work with your students. Little agenda here. We're going to have a refresher. I have a quiz for you. It's real easy. We're going to talk about research to practice. And then I will be referring to the guide that you see highlighted there. Okay. And then finally, and this is the fun part, I'm going to ask you to participate as I walk through a demonstration of how evidence-based practices and instructional routines can be embedded into a basic phonics lesson plan. All right, so here we go. True or false? If you can find that little response bar at the bottom, there's a thumbs up. I think there's a thumbs down. If there's not a thumbs down, just give me a thumbs up when it's appropriate and don't do anything if it's not. Okay, so here's your first question. The science of reading refers to a universal phonics-based reading program that can be purchased. True or false? Now you can just pop it up, and then I'm just going to pop up the right answer. Okay, so this is not true at all. It is not a program. We'll talk a little bit more about what it is in a couple minutes. The graphic of a simple view of reading uses a multiplication problem to depict the dual importance of word recognition and oral language in comprehension. Is that true? Whoops, can you see my thumb? Is it true or is it false? Okay, well, that one indeed is true. Okay, moving on down. The National Reading Panel report is a synthesis of years of empirical studies related to reading. Okay, that is true. It is a meta-analysis, means it looked at the time, it looked at all the research that was out there. And finally, Scarborough has called her reading rope a metaphor for the simple view of reading. True or false? So this is a new piece for me. I was calling it a theoretical model, and I discovered recently that she refers to it as a metaphor for the simple view of reading. Okay, so that's our review. Now we are going to move on. So we're going to be talking about research to practice. The body of research we call the science of reading is comprehensive and multidimensional. The consensus drawn from the research tells us that the most effective instruction for teaching children how to read is what we are calling structured literacy. And the term structured literacy comes to us from the International Dyslexia Association, or IDA, and you can see the descriptions of both there. Okay, this is one of the things that will pop up in the chat, the link to it, but I believe she is going to send out the whole list of with all the links that will be up in the chat later on. So evidence-based teaching practices and principles of instruction, just, you know, a composite view. Okay, present new materials and you can see, but you can get a copy of this very easily on your own. So let's talk about what to teach and how to teach it. The International Dyslexia Association also developed this infographic. It's used to illustrate an approach to evidence-based reading instruction called structured literacy. You can see here that the science of reading provides the why, the rationale for instruction that follows the content, the what, the principles, the how, and the approaches to reading, or in fact, any instruction. So I want to make this clear. So although we are talking about reading, direct, explicit, systematic, and cumulative instruction is appropriate for any content that you would be teaching. Before I dive any deeper, I want to introduce some of the logistics to you. So from time to time, I will insert an example from a lesson. Your cue will be one of those teacher icons, right? And typically, this slide will also have what I'm calling teacher talk, which is sort of a mini script that you might see in the demonstration. The clipboards have examples of things that you might use to augment your instruction. Okay, so those will come up. You'll notice them. They're very obvious. This is just one example of an explicit instruction lesson planning template, and I borrowed it from Archer and Hughes. You will see this reflected in the lessons or the demonstrations that I do as we go through our work today. Structured literacy approaches teach the foundational reading skills identified through research that are essential for efficient overall reading skill development. This IES practice guide lists 4 recommendations. We're going to use these recommendations today to show how we move from what to teach to how to teach using a structured literacy instructional approach. We know all students in grades K through 3 need these recommended skills, but there's a time and a place for the development of each skill where students need more or less emphasis on a particular concept or content. For example, recommendation 1 that you can see here, okay, this spans all grade levels and focuses on language development, which continues to develop throughout your life. I mean, I'm still learning new words, and I'm sure you are too. Recommendation 2 focuses on cracking the code, building phonemic awareness and translating it into the alphabetic principle. Okay, and this content is focused on through grade 1, maybe into grade 2. It depends on your curriculum and your students. Recommendations 3 and 4 pick up midway through kindergarten and continue through grade 3 and focus on advancing, decoding, and comprehending skills. I'm going to give you a second to take a look at that. Okay, so we're going to start with recommendation 1. Teach students academic language skills, including the use of inferential and narrative language. This is another infographic. Don't you love infographics? Pictures speak louder than words, don't they? So this is an infographic that helps us unpack the recommendations. It illustrates that the skills are taught across K through 3rd grade. It discusses what academic language is and the 3 areas that students can become fluent in using their acquired language skills. Okay, this is directly from the IES document. Notice that each recommendation has associated action steps. Look at the arrow. The arrow goes both ways. Okay, these are not ordinal action steps, nor are they ordered in their effectiveness or level of evidence. Okay, we want to know, anyway, you look at the whole picture, I guess is what I want to say. So let's look at action step number 1. Okay, here are some conversation starters for both fiction and nonfiction. We want our children to be able to use language to inference. You know, inference also requires some background knowledge too, doesn't it? Remember that kids like fiction and they like nonfiction, and both types of text are appropriate for all grades, and students should experience them both. So again, this is from the guide, which you will have a link to, and it gives you some tips for conversation starters. Okay, we also want, if we think about narrative language skills, include the ability to organize information into a logical sentence. Remember, narrative is a story, so we have to have a logical sequence and connect that information using what are really very complex grammatical structures. So we want to teach them to predict, to discuss, to connect, to describe, and so on. Remember, when we think about writing, writing is the most advanced literacy skill there is. Okay, remember that this recommendation crosses all the grades. Now, that said, you're not likely to be talking about subordinate clauses and prepositional phrases in kindergarten. At least I doubt it. You'll be using them, but you won't be teaching them. All right, so here's our first teacher talk. So the context, you might see something like this at the end of kindergarten and into grades 3. Students have been taught the concept of a sentence, and they have written dictated sentences. The use of terms, you'll see that I'm suggesting that you might use flashcards. The use of terms is a scaffold. So think about it. A child's oral vocabulary typically exceeds their word recognition and their decoding skills. But then oral vocabulary and word recognition typically exceed their orthographic or spelling skills. So what we're doing is we're scaffolding by giving them the words so they can see how they're spelled. These are words they already know how to read, okay? So that they can use their sight vocabulary, if you will, to write more interesting sentences. I mean, how often do you see the little ones and they don't know how to spell the words, so they're afraid to put something down on the paper. So we're just going to take that part out of the difficulty there. So I would use this teacher talk here to introduce the lesson. So today I would tell my students, we're going to learn a way to build a simple sentence. Remember, a simple sentence is one complete thought. I like to think of a sentence as a very short story, okay? Like a story, a sentence has a character, but in a sentence, we call our character the subject. Like a story, there's action, okay? In a sentence, the verb is the action. So keeping that in mind, we're going to move to this little activity. So you can see that I have words on cards and I've arranged them nouns, verbs, phrases, articles, and then some punctuation. So to work with my students, I would tell them, I'm going to make the first sentence and then we'll make one together. Okay, I do, we do, you do it with a partner, and then you do it on your own, right? I will make the first sentence, then we'll make one together. Finally, you can work with a partner to make a new sentence. But let's read the words first. So again, I would say each word, have my students repeat it. They would point to it and repeat it. I'm not going to ask you to do this part. I'll have you talking enough later on. But now let's look on and see what happens. So I'm going to go through a think aloud as I do my modeling here. So I think I'm going to write a sentence about my dog, Rover. Okay, so there's Rover. So what would Rover do? Well, Rover's not going to climb and he's not going to skip. Okay, but he's probably going to run. Okay, and there's my past tense. Rover ran. Okay, well, where did Rover run? Did he run up a tree? No. Rover ran around the block. Well, it's a statement, but it's not particularly exciting. So I'm not going to use an exclamation point. I'm going to use a period. Okay, remember, this is a really simple sentence. Okay, so to make it more complicated or perhaps more interesting for your kids, you don't have to use cards. You can have students create lists to work from. So your students may not need words grouped by function. They may only need an array of flashcards or a list of known words to help facilitate, prompt their activate their prior knowledge about words that they use in their oral language so they can translate their oral language into written language. Later on, or with older children, you can actually demonstrate combining two related simple sentences into a compound sentence. But then, of course, you have to teach coordinating conjunctions and the use of the semicolon. Okay, so I'm just going to keep moving. So Beck and McEwen identified 3 tiers of vocabulary. Tier 1 is the basic vocabulary, words that we use in everyday conversation. Tier 2 include robust high-frequency words, and these will often have multiple meanings, and they're used across content areas. Best example I could come up with this morning was digit, meaning the number, and then your finger is also a digit. A coordinate works too, coordinate. Anyway, but Tier 3 are the low-frequency content-specific words. Everyone has to teach Tier 3 words. All right, they are essential for understanding each discipline. And I have some tips on teaching that very, very important Tier 3 vocabulary. Okay, we've got a teacher talk again. If you have taught a particular content area for a number of years, you become pretty familiar with what vocabulary your students often have when they come to you, but maybe not. So you need to find out what words that are important in your unit that the kids know and which ones they don't know. A knowledge rater can help you determine where to spend your instructional time. So the context here is that the students are familiar with the knowledge rater and they're comfortable with it. They know it's not going to get graded. Okay, the raters, you may ask the kids to put their names on them and hand them in. They may be anonymous. It's up to you. Bottom line is you ask the kids to self-assess. So settler, if they think they know what settler is, I got this one, they should write a brief definition. Okay, and it goes to sound familiar, but I'm not really sure. And over to, I don't know this word. Okay, I've actually used happy faces and smiley faces on a Likert scale too. So the instruction, of course, is going to focus on the words that the majority of your students can't define, right? That makes sense, and you save time. Well, let's take a look here. Graphic organizers, there's a huge body of research on graphic organizers alone, okay? And there are a variety that enhance learning and recall of vocabulary. Whatever you use, consider addressing these aspects. So I picked the word artifact, all right? We want them to know how to pronounce it, okay? And I say, so say artifact for me. Let's count the syllables. Artifacts. There are 3 syllables. Draw 3 lines on your piece of paper for me. Let's figure out how to spell artifact. Okay, so then you would have something like this. So we want them to be able to, well, read it, okay, and to spell it. We want them to know a little bit about the meaningful parts of the word. Remember, a morpheme is the smallest meaningful unit in a word. So, artifact is an object made by a human being for decoration or practical purposes. That's where the art part comes from. Typically, an artifact has cultural or historical importance. It has facts, right? Okay, it teaches us facts about the culture. So there's our word artifact, and we've broken it down, and I've given an example, a carved button. And we also want them to be able to use the word in a sentence. So my sentence, okay, I'm not sure we made it. I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia today, about 100 miles north of Jamestown. Artifacts from Jamestown include buttons and pottery. So again, you want to take them through some levels of language with this vocabulary. Okay, and now we're going to move into the big part of our lesson. Okay, we've looked at recommendation 1, and so our focus is going to be on recommendations 2 through 4. Recommendation 2 refers to phonemic awareness and phonics instruction that helps children develop the alphabetic principle. As indicated in the findings of the National Reading Panel, action step 1 relates to teaching students to recognize and manipulate speech sounds, phonemic awareness, right? Action step 2 refers to teaching students to link those sounds to letters, to combinations, all right? We're getting into phonics. And action step 3 relates to the application of these skills in reading and writing words. All right, so recommendation 3, and that's a doozy, isn't it? Okay, recommendation 3, the action steps in this recommendation build on recommendation 2, and they clearly refer to phonics and decoding instruction, including both regular decodable and irregular high-frequency words. Now, you remember, you will get the link to this IES document. Okay, so let's look at recommendation 4. Recommendation 4 addresses action steps for initial oral reading instruction, feedback, and opportunities for practice. All right, so now we're going to get into the how. Okay, I'm going to demonstrate the how of many of these action steps in the 3 recommendations that are integrated into a basic phonics lesson plan. And I'm going to reiterate again. The science of reading is not just phonics. The science of reading is about everything to do about literacy, all the aspects identified by the National Reading Panel. And once again, I will tell you the direct, systematic, explicit, cumulative, and scaffolded instruction is good for any child in any content. So a structured literacy approach also requires that we take data. That's how we know what to do the next day. It tells us what our kids have learned, and it guides our instruction. Corrective and confirming feedback is critical. Okay, yes, teachable moments are teachable moments, and you don't lose them, but you want to go back to your lesson plan and you want to keep the order. You want to have purposeful scaffolding, and all these principles can be addressed through the lens of an explicit instructional lesson plan. Okay, and here it is. Whoops, wait a minute. There you go. So again, I've readapted the basic template that I showed you earlier. I've readapted it into what we're going to do in this phonics lesson plan. All right. So folks, move ahead here for a second. We have some more teacher talk. Okay, that's just your reminder of what the teacher talk is all about. Okay, so now's the fun part. I'm going to ask you to unmute, and I'm going to ask you to be the student. So as I go through this phonics lesson plan, please, somebody answer me, or I'm going to feel really silly here sitting in my office talking to myself. Will you feel silly? Probably, but it's okay. All right, Jorge, I see you unmuted. Yay! Thank you. Just yell it out. I'll be very explicit when I need you to talk. Okay, moving along. I need to give you the context of this lesson plan. It's not just from the middle of nowhere. So we're going to look at the structured literacy approach in a kindergarten phonics lesson plan. Okay, this is the structure and principles of instruction that would remain the same in the upper grades, but the concepts introduced increase in complexity. So in kindergarten, we're teaching one-on-one phoneme grapheme correspondence. In first grade, we're probably teaching vowel teams, maybe blends, digraphs, and some more complicated phonics structures. By second and third grade, they may be learning advanced concepts like spelling and suffixing patterns. It's important to note that explicit lesson plans would be used across the literacy block. Well, I'm beating that into your heads, aren't I? So here's the context of our lesson plan. This is kindergarten, about the second quarter. This is lesson 12 within a very well-defined scope and sequence. I've shown you these letters, consonants and vowels have already been taught. And the high frequency words that you see there, the children should be familiar with them as well. Okay, so we're going to go into one more thing to keep in mind. You're only going to see a snapshot of each portion of the lesson. This chunk of your literacy block that you would devote to phonics in a kindergarten class would last about 30 minutes. Once you get it planned and you get it rolling and you use the slide deck rather than flashcards, which I tend to drop all over the floor, it goes smoothly. Okay, I have it stuck in a bonus segment on teaching irregular words, but remember, you're the teacher. You know your students, and you're the one who makes the instructional decisions in your classroom. But again, we want to make sure that we're using direct, explicit instruction. All right, so first part is here. I'm going to activate your prior knowledge, and we're going to go into the review portion. So, and here's my joke. Your mission, if you choose to accept it, is to turn on audio and be a student. Okay. All right. Here's my teacher talk. So I'm going to tell my kids today we're going to learn a new phonics concept. But first, let's practice the letter sounds and some of the words that we've studied. I always follow this up before I go in, even to a review. I remind my little ones, okay, so we've done this before, but I want to remind you what the process is. So I'll do it first, and then you can do it with me. So what we're going to do is this. Here's my card. All right. So we're going to practice the letter sounds. I'll show you a card with the letter. You name the letter and then say the sound like this. I would say M says Okay, would you say that for me?
M
says
Oh, thank you. So as we go through the card, you're just going to see the letters. You're just going to say the name of the letter and the sound. Okay, ready? Here we go.
E says
He says
A
says
A says ah. G
G
says
says G.
good.
H says
All right, good job. Now, obviously, there would be more in a real lesson, but we're not gonna, not gonna push you too hard here. All right. After we go, okay, my computer's getting very sensitive. I'm gonna have to keep my hands up in the air. The next thing you want to do is spell the sounds. Whatever you teach in reading, you also want to teach in spelling, even when you're down to the phoneme grapheme correspondence. So when I look at this, I'm going to tell you that we're going to spell sounds. Listen to the phoneme and repeat it. So I'm going to tell you my phoneme or sound is k. Say the phoneme for me. Thank you. All right. What letter makes that sound?
K.
Letter K. All right. So write the letter K. Now, I know you probably don't have anything to write on, and that's okay. So in your classroom, there are a variety of options for this spelling or writing part that you would do. You can see them. There are pros and cons for each. For example, although the sand seems like a lot of fun, some kids can't stand the feel of it. Personal whiteboards may not be available. I buy them at the dollar store. Change it up when you can. Present 3 to 6 phonemes, okay? And this is the process. Again, just like I would say the sound, k, students would repeat the sound, k, and then as they wrote the letter, they would say K says k. All right, and you go through 3 to 6 phonemes. Okay, everybody good out there? I see a smile. Okay, thank you, Catherine. All right, the last part of our review is blending. Okay, I'm going to tell my students up front, okay, there aren't going to be any surprises here. Okay, I do use a slide deck for blending because the projections, the kids can see the slides when they're up on the wall better than if I'm holding cards in front of them. Also, that puts me in control of what letters come up so I don't accidentally get something inappropriate and have to flip it really fast. The next 4 slides that I'm going to ask you to blend with me demonstrate the use of the chaining technique. And that is, I'm only going to change one letter or sound, okay, at a time. And this illustrates to students that words can vary by just one sound, okay, because we have this phonetic language that we use. All right, so our demo, okay, this is our I do. All right, so we're going to read the letter sounds and blend them into a word. Watch me do it. Ham. All right, now I'm going to ask you to do it with me. Are you ready? Ham. Good job. Thank you. Selena, I saw you talking too. Thank you so much. All right, so we will go through this. I'll say it with you, but we'll just, and there's only a few here. All right, our next set. Sam. Want to try it?
Sad.
Sam. All right. I've only changed one. Try it.
Sad.
Add. Okay, remember, you're not able to read these words yet. You have to sound them out. You have to blend them. Odd.
Sod.
All right.
But they
And
don't.
one more. This is the one that doesn't fit the pattern. Yeah, good job. All right, so as your students become more proficient with this, you will obviously, as you teach blends, you'll include blends. As you teach digraphs, you'll include digraphs, and so on for your, your vowel teams and so on and so forth. They will be part of your blending routine. Blending is critical. As you look, again, I'm not going to flip back to those recommendations, but we know that blending and segmenting are critical skills for learning how to read. They need to know how to blend the phonemes into a word, and they need to know how to also segment the phonemes of a word, and that will help with spelling. All right, so I'm going to give you a chance to catch your breath till we move into the next section. Okay, another way you can review is you can give kids word lists of words that they've seen before. They can read decodable books. Anything to get them to practice and to interact with the text is a good thing to do during your review. All right, so now we're going to move into our actual lesson, teaching the new concept. Okay, and I need your help here too. Okay, there's teacher talk. The kids are not going to see these sentences. They're only going to hear them. And the phonemic awareness is for the target phoneme graphing concept only here. I did not put a whole phonemic awareness lesson into this lesson plan. Okay, you want your students to identify and repeat the initial phoneme. So it goes like this. I'm going to say a sentence to you, and I want you to listen very carefully to the first sound in every word. Are you ready? Tom took turkey. What's the first sound you hear in every word? Somebody? Thank you. All right, I have another sentence for you. Two tiny turtles told tales. What's the first sound? Thank you. You guys are such good sports. So you hear t. Say it with me. Feel your tongue tapping behind your teeth. That's how you make the t sound. Okay, the next thing we're going to do is I'm going to show you some pictures. Typically in a classroom, I do it one at a time, but I have an array on the next slide. We would name the pictures, and I would have the kids determine whether or not that picture began with t or not. So we're just going to do the first couple across the top. All right, so my first word is tiger. What's the word?
Tiger.
Tiger. Does tiger start with t?
Yes.
Yes.
It does. Thank you. My second word is turtle. What's the word?
Turtle.
Turtle. Does turtle start with t?
Yes.
Thank you. And my third word is book. Does book start with t?
No.
No, it does not. Okay, so you get the idea. We don't need to do the rest of them. Okay, the other thing that you would want to do is you want to have the kids focusing on the articulation of the words. I think I flipped that a little early. So we want them to understand how they articulate the sound. Mirrors can be really handy if you can get little mirrors for them to look at. You can also buy or find online pictures of what your mouth looks like when you articulate the sounds. I'm just focusing on consonant sounds right now so that they can see what their mouth should look like. Children with severe auditory discrimination issues could have difficulty determining whether it's a t or a d because they're pronounced the same way except for the aspiration, okay, and the voicing. The t sound is an unvoiced consonant sound. Okay, there's a stop. You also blow a puff of air. So hold your hand in front of your mouth and say, okay, you would have your students do that. So you'd say, gosh, there's a puff of air. Then you might say, well, feel your throat when you say, there's no vibration. Now say d.
Yeah.
Should feel something, shouldn't you? So if you can't hear the difference, because sometimes the classroom gets a little noisy, if you say it and feel it, you can figure out what sound we're working on. All right. So the next thing we want to do is we want them to make the direct connection between the phonemic awareness and alphabetic knowledge. So I will put some words up that began with T, and I say, here's some words. I'm going to read them to you. I'm going to ask you what sound you hear in the beginning. Top, tin, tag. And my students would say, what do you hear? Okay, good job. You can see that we spell the t sound with the letter T. Okay, and there's my anchor word. I use turtle for my anchor word. Okay, we're moving along at a fast pace here. So think about how many things are arranged in alphabetical order. Alphabetic order is a life skill. Interesting, isn't it? So you want to show your students where it falls in the alphabet. They could highlight it, they could color it, and talk about your anchor word that you're using for the phoneme. Whoops, getting oversensitive again. Again, we want them to learn how to write the letter that goes with the sound. So we want them to have some practice. You know, handwriting, explicit instruction, and letter formation has sort of gone by the wayside in Virginia. I'm not sure how it is where you live in California. Automaticity in letter formation facilitates writing words, sentences, even paragraphs. You don't have to spend your cognitive load on thinking, how do I make a T? How do I make a T? Letter formation instruction, again, needs to be direct, explicit, modeled, maybe a lot, and practiced. Tracing can be helpful. If possible, if you have them, colored pencils make it less onerous. There's a little technique called rainbow writing, which you trace over the target letter 3 times with 3 different colors. Kids tend to like that. So again, teachers, you need to model it using cute paper. You can find that online, any kind of cute paper. Do a think aloud and verbalize the phoneme. So as they write the letter, you want them to say, T says T. Okay. And let's see, we're going to move along to guided practice. Guided practice can look a lot of different ways. This is just one example of a phoneme graphing activity and addresses 3 elements that we saw in the action steps. So as a teacher, I would say, and you get to rest for a few minutes here. Our new letter sound is T, okay? And T says T. So far, we've just talked about T at the beginning of a word. Let's sound out each letter across the top. We're not going to do that. I would do it with my students, but we don't need to do it. All right, now let's practice making some words. So because we're focusing on T says T, okay, we're going to put our T down here and we're going to move letters in and out, but the T will stay in its place and be the first sound in all of our words. Now I'm going to ask you to move the O after the T and the P after the O. Okay, and I would say, now look at your word. Okay, let's blend it. Top. Okay, then I would say, change your O for an A. Same procedure. Tap. Oops, I forgot the directions. Change your A for an I. Tip. All right, so again, you're getting into that blending piece again. There are those little handprints you can use. You can teach children finger tap spelling. Again, it's just tapping and counting the phonemes with a handprint for a scaffold. Okay, words for dictation would only have letter sounds that you have learned, and we're going to get into dictation here for a minute. All right, so these are the steps in the dictation part of your lesson. When I was a new teacher, I did not appreciate the value of dictation. Okay, and now I'm ashamed to admit it, but I will. I really didn't. I just, maybe because I didn't like it when I was a kid, I don't know. But the steps are the same. Again, the child listens and they repeat. Notice that articulation piece. They hear it, they say it. When they say it, they feel it. They count the phonemes, draw a line for each phoneme, write and spell the words. Okay, so remember, you're scaffolding the whole process of dictation. As children get older, they'll do this automatically and they won't have to draw the lines and things like that. Okay, then the next thing you do after they've spelled the word that you've dictated, you give them the correct answer and they self-check. Okay, so I'd say, does yours match mine? Okay, if it doesn't, please correct it and then write it again in the check column. Okay, so for example, let's practice with the word. Okay, so our word is tip. What's the word? Tip. How many sounds? Tip. There are 3 sounds, so we would make 3 lines. Okay, and then I would say to them, write the letters that go with the phonemes. T, I. Okay, and then you can correct it. If you have to correct it, but then write it again. Okay, sentence dictation is basically the same. I guess the only part that's different is when you count the words. Some people will say, instead of going just, you know, tip is a dog, you go, tip is a dog. Or you found on the desk lightly, tip is a dog. Okay, so you want to count the words, draw a line for each word, and then write the word in order from the sentence. Again, it's important to have the kids repeat the sentence. This is a very short sentence. If you have longer sentences and there's an issue with auditory memory, break your sentence into phrases. That's okay. You know, and hopefully they'll be able to remember longer spurts of sentences and words when they get a little bit more experience. Okay, independent and extended practice. You know, a lot of people think teachers get to sit at their desk while the kids are working independently. You know better than that. You're out, you're walking around the room, you're checking to see what they're doing, that they're on task. You need to make sure they know what they're supposed to do. You may have to model it before you turn them loose if they haven't done it recently. You need to be available for questions, provide feedback, and then, you know, you use the student performance to consider your next steps. Okay, little Judith didn't get it. I think I'm going to have to go over that T again with her. All right, lots of independent practice things you can do. Trace, copy, cover has been around forever. And I think I have a friend who, she's more of a nerd than I am. And she said that trace, copy, cover was developed by Grace Fernald back in the early 1900s, maybe the 30s, 20s or 30s, which I was like, whoa, that's amazing. I haven't looked it up yet. And she didn't give me a citation. Anyway, there's lots of things that you can do for the independent practice, but keep track of what they're doing. This is an extended practice, and not all kids need something this, but also remember that practice doesn't stop on day 1, and you need to have a variety of ways for kids to practice the new concept during the week. So this could also be considered intensification. This is called phoneme graphing mapping, and it's a great option. It combines phonemic awareness, segmenting, and blending. What more could you want, right? All right, so if you want to unmute, I'm going to tell you a word. Okay, my word is cat. What's the word?
Cat.
Cat. Thank you.
Cat.
All right, let's stretch to hear the phonemes.
Cat.
How many phonemes do you hear?
3.
3.
3. So how many paper clips are we going to move?
3.
We're going to move 3, exactly. I buy my colored paper clips at the dollar store. Bingo markers are also good. Pennies, if you can do it. Anyway, so then we say, okay, so we have 3 sounds. I know, I've told you that this is a CBC word, so we know that there's going to be 1 letter for each sound. So you would say, what letter spells K?
T.
Okay, and they would write it. I'm going to pop it up in a minute. What letter spells A?
A.
Thank you. And what letter spells T?
T.
T. Okay, so they would go directly into the boxes under the paper clips, and then they would write the word as a whole. Okay, anything, you know, where they get to move things around, it can be engaging. Now, it doesn't have to be paper clips. If you're working one-on-one with tutoring a little boy or something, it could be a little girl, you can have little those little matchbox cars. They can move matchbox cars. They could move game markers, anything to make it more interesting. You know, if you change what they move, they can think it's a whole new activity. Oh, we're going to do this differently today. Look what I brought in. Okay, moving right along. Okay, physical phonics. 2 ways to do physical phonics. Physical phonics is the game, and it gets kids up and moving. So you have a team of children, and each member of the team gets a letter or a grapheme that represents a phoneme to hold up. You see, we've got CK there, 2 letters, 1 phoneme. Okay, the students at their desk have something to write on, maybe whiteboards, maybe paper. Teacher says a word. Children at their desk spell the word. Teacher circulates to make sure they have it correct. Okay, once they do, they, excuse me. So after the kids have finished writing at their desk, the physical phonics team builds the word. So you'd say, okay, team, and they line up. Then everybody checks to make sure that they've got the word right. Okay, you can extend this and you could have this children tell their name. What does this word mean? Tax. Is this the tax? They wouldn't know income tax. That was a bad example. Anyway, if you ever sat on a tax. All right, so they can talk about the definition and so on. The signs, the little signs with the TOP, it's just a way of moving the words around again and getting them to change it up. All right, connected text, decodable text. Up until very recently, it was difficult to find decodable text, but now we can. Okay, you use decodable text when we're teaching explicit concepts because we want our kids to practice those concepts and review the concepts that we've already taught them. You could start with reading a list of words like I have here, but reading a list of words or unrelated phrases or sentences doesn't support comprehension. Reading text accurately, fluently, with appropriate phrasing requires word recognition as well as the integration of prior knowledge and maybe some new information. Reading orally, especially with corrective feedback, needs to start early, as soon as the kids know a few words. Okay, several of the activities that we've already done support learning new words. This example of connected text could be possibly used with our student who just learned T-SIST. Okay, there are ways to transfer your transfer to text. So you have your new concept and you want them to practice one. This one comes from Susan Hall and the 95% Group's phonics lesson library. I adapted it because I stuck in, again, I think I'm a special educator and reading someone who's worked with kids who struggle. I put in the top, review irregular words as needed. I would put review any words as needed. Okay, but you use one text for 2 days, use another text for 2 more days, and on day 5, you have a new text to review the irregular words, and they get a clean copy of it, and you ask them to read it. So it's almost an assessment, isn't it? So a couple of years ago, a colleague of mine, Megan Seckinger, developed an adapted way transfer to text. And you can see we only have one passage, but as you go across the week, you're doing different things with it. You highlight words, concept words, underline red or heart words, read the underlined words, and so on and so forth. Remember, right now we're in kindergarten. Using one of these text transfer routines is a key instructional way for our kids to practice. When you get into the upper grades, grade 1, the kids are going to have non-controlled text when you're transferring because remember, they have more skills. So you don't have to focus on just 1 or maybe 2 things to repeat and practice. And I'm going to need to start talking faster. Okay, high frequency words. Okay, I'm going to just run through heart words for you. But I found this statistic interesting because English isn't as weird as we may think it is. About 50% of our words are normal, regular words. And if you know the rules, that's the key. Got to know the rules. You can figure them out. Another 36% will have one irregular part. And so we really only have about 14% that are going to be tough. And these words are called red words, just plain irregulars, tricksters, heart words, naughty words, whatever. Okay, the red word technique, and you will get the link for the University of Florida for UFly. Anything you wanted to know about using this technique called heart words. And heart word focuses on the decodable piece and teaches the irregular piece as the part you have to learn by heart. I'm going to run you through one word so you get to practice and you have a better understanding of what it feels like. This is the sequence. And again, you're going to get a copy of this. So I'm not going to read the slide to you. That's really boring. And I know you probably spent your whole day at work with a group of kids, but these are the steps, but let's just do it. Okay. I'm going to ask you to unmute again, if you will. All righty. Listen to the word. My word is said. What's my word?
Said.
Said. Good
Said.
job. Let's count the phonemes.
Ed,
D.
D.
I have how many
Three.
phonemes?
Three.
3. So you would draw 3 lines on your paper. So far, so good, right? Okay, next step. The first sound in said is S. How do you spell that sound?
S.
S.
You spell it with an S, don't you? So write S on, whoops, write S on your first line. Okay, I think you know what's coming up, right? The last sound in said is D. How do you spell D?
D.
With a
D.
D. So write a D on the last line. Thanks for your sense of humor. I really appreciate it. All right. So now we're in our middle. It's the middle sound. It says eh. How would you probably spell eh?
E.
With an
E.
E. Aha, but not in said. In said. This is the part you have to learn by heart because in said, the eh is spelled with an AI. Oh my gosh. So since you have to learn this part by heart, you get to put a little heart over it. Okay. So that's in a nutshell, that's the heart word routine. It's I've used it quite a bit. Other ways, there are many ways to teach the irregular words. Other ways you can teach the whole word. Again, there's lots of different ways. This one I like because it focuses on what they know. And it's sort of takes some of the fear out of it. All right. Whew. All right, we're at the end. Oh my gosh. So somewhere along the line, you need to be doing formative assessment because that's going to tell you where you can go the next day. It could be at the end of the lesson. And probably if you're an experienced teacher, you're constantly assessing the performance of the students as you go through different steps in your lesson. At the end, you want to summarize. Hey, today we learned a new concept. What's a new concept? T says t. Good job. Tomorrow, we're going to learn about T saying t at the end of words. So be ready. All right. Whew. Let's do a quick review. So we did a lot today. So let's take a few minutes to reflect on this journey from research to practice. We talked about the science of reading, that vast body of research, and it's growing. Okay, there's no dead end to this. There's reading research going on right now that will be included in the science of reading. This is what provides the rationale for direct, explicit, systematic, cumulative instruction that we call the structured literacy approach. An instruction that addresses the why, the what, and the how. Okay, so, questions? Do we have questions in the chat? How much time do we, we've got about 3 minutes.
We have 3 minutes and I didn't see any questions come through the chat. So if there is a question, you can go ahead and unmute. I think we'll have time for maybe 2 or 3.
Unmute and just yell it out.
Judith,
Yes.
this is Jorge.
Hi.
When you say prior knowledge, we're not looking at long-term archaeological knowledge, right? We're talking about what came the day before, immediate, still warm knowledge.
Yeah, so prior knowledge, that's a really broad term. So I could tell you right now, confession, I have 8 grandchildren. 3 of them right now, as I speak, are in Williamsburg, Virginia, and they spent the day going to Jamestown and Yorktown, and I think the Williamsburg recreation of Williamsburg. Okay, so when they get to 4th grade social studies in Virginia, guess what you study? Virginia history. They're going to have some prior knowledge of the colonies. Okay, they may even have a little bit, may already know what an artifact is. Or when I tell them, remember you saw that pottery in the museum that the settlers used? That's called an artifact. Okay, so prior knowledge, when you think about, I'm thinking inference. If I'm reading a book, let's say I'm reading nonfiction, and I'm reading about physics, prior knowledge is like almost non-existent. So I'm going to need a lot of help. I'm going to need scaffolding. I'm going to need someone to teach me vocabulary and to teach me some of the basic things before I try to hit it on my own in a book. So I would say prior knowledge is maybe in your long-term memory, something that you can access to help you understand what you're learning now, but it could also be something that you just experienced the day before. But I would really say probably think long-term memory for that. Does that help? Making sense?
Thank you.
Anyone else? Hi. Someone going to speak?
Hi,
Hi, do you have a question? I can see someone.
yes,
bottom. Yes.
yeah, my name is Matilda Hollander.
Oh, hello, Matilda.
Yes, and my question is, how do you apply phonemes to let students
Language learners?
English? I'm a language teacher,
Yes.
and I taught for many years, and I retired now. I write books in many languages. That's what I do. This
So,
is extremely interesting what you are showing us.
so, phonemic awareness, you learn it's developmental. You learn it when you're a kid, right? And you
Yeah,
learn it in your
yeah,
native
yeah,
language.
sounds, yes.
So I spent 3 years in Japan and I
Okay.
went over there. Man, I was going to learn Japanese. I was so hot. I was also going to learn how to do tea ceremonies and flower arranging too. I did 2 of the 3. It took me a year to acquire enough phonemic awareness for what we call word boundaries in a sentence. When I listened to a native Okinawan speak Japanese, I couldn't tell where one word ended and another word picked up. That's phonological awareness, isn't it? And so we think of anyone who's learning English or any other language, that whole idea, the concept of the sounds of those language, it takes you a while to become accustomed to the sounds of a language. And there are even sounds in languages okay, I'm trying to think, in Spanish, the tilde, the ñ, señora.
Senora.
Okay, and the rolling of the R, burro. All right, we don't do that in English. So when I learned Spanish, I had to learn those phonemes and I had to learn the letters, the graphemes that went with those phonemes. And so I think we need to remember that the research tells us that language learners, it takes 5 to 7 years to be able to acquire enough academic language to, be able to reach proficiency. It's hard. And you're starting from the beginning, and I commend you. I'm sure you have lots of students who remember you.
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah, I
I'm
see
gonna-
that all the
I will
time.
take more questions, but I wanted to put this up. Any other question? I'll hang around.
I think we're actually gonna end there. For folks who need to sign off, thank you so much for joining us. I dropped the link to our survey here, and there's also a QR code. Dr. Judith is very kind in telling us that she will answer in an email a question that you have. So if you do have more questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. We thank you all for joining us. I know it's late in the day. You've all probably had full days already.
Mhm.
Same with Dr. Judith, and she's on the East Coast. So again, thank you so much for joining us. If you want to stick around, we'll be here for maybe 1 more minute, but that is it for us.
And thank you for being such good students.